We begin this story with Miller, a talented thief who is adept at picking locks. He receives valuable information from a corrupt police officer named Zwick, who gives him the address of his next target. Zwick assures them that no one will bother them, as there is no patrol nearby. After that, Miller and his friend Kevin head to the designated location, where Miller demonstrates his talent by forcing the lock in just a few seconds. Once inside, Kevin cuts the wall, and both hook onto a safe that is on the other side of the wall, pulling it toward them. This is when the precision work begins, and Miller stands out by opening the safe as if it were child's play. Inside, there are tens of thousands of dollars, a much bigger sum than what they're used to. They quickly start removing the money and putting it in a bag when suddenly a flashing light catches their attention. It turns out there was a motion detector inside the safe that activated when they moved it. In his car, Zwick receives the robbery alert, so he tries to buy the boys some time by asking that they repeat the information. After a few minutes, Zwick arrives, and we notice he has two guns, his service weapon and another one in his left hand. Right at that moment, he takes the secondary weapon and shoots at his own car twice, and when Kevin comes out of the place, Zwick fires at him with his service weapon, killing him. Zwick quickly places the gun near Kevin's body and removes his gloves so that, by the time Miller comes out, the officers have already cordoned off the area. Miller is arrested, and Zwick takes the opportunity, while they handcuff Miller, to tell him exactly what happened. Kevin had a gun and shot at a police officer, and the officer only defended himself. Then he tells Miller to cooperate, threatening him with harming Beth and the baby, whom we'll meet later. 10 years have passed, and Miller has served his sentence. Now he's a free man, and the first thing that happens when he gets out is that he's greeted by his friend Frank, who's very happy to see him. After taking a shower and changing clothes, Miller calls his girlfriend Beth to see if they can meet somewhere. Later, we meet Beth and little Lindsay, who are Miller's family. Miller shattered this family when he was arrested and allowed Kevin, his brother-in-law, to be killed. Beth blames Miller for all these mistakes as soon as he arrives. He can't pretend that the 10 absent years will just vanish and then play happy family. With this in mind, Miller starts working very hard and manages to begin a service for newly built condominiums, where he earns a bit more money. Right after finishing a job, the client tells him that she only hired him because her friend April recommended him. It turns out that April is Kevin's widow, and Miller hasn't heard from her for 10 years. When Miller returns to his business, he finds April waiting for him to welcome him back. They chat for a bit until April tells him she needs his help. She's in a dangerous situation and fears she'll be killed if she tries to escape. So she needs money to get far away and start a new life, and she already has the perfect job that will net them a lot of money. Miller immediately says he can't risk it. He's trying to straighten out his life and get his family back. Although Miller is tempted to ask her about the job, Frank reminds him to keep his eyes on the prize, and that prize is his family, not the money. The next morning, Miller goes out to work and is stopped by a patrol. While the detectives approach, a Corvette appears out of nowhere and stops in front of Miller. Out steps Zwick, who is pleased to see the protagonist, although the young man only wonders if his life will be ruined once again. Zwick tells him that, thanks to the arrest he made that night, he became a lieutenant and is now about to retire. However, his colleagues, Pearce and Jones, will take his place, and they might need Miller for some future job. After that, the detectives arrest Miller just to waste his time. Here we discover that Beth is also a police detective, one of the good ones, not like Jones and Perez, who are being scolded for arresting Miller with no proof that he was committing a robbery. Some lockpicks inside an old van are not sufficient evidence to lock him up again. Thus, Miller is released. With Zwick's retirement looming, he tries to cover all loose ends from his past corrupt dealings. He uses his rank to transfer Beth to his unit so he can keep an eye on her and bury her in paperwork. Later on, Miller has his first visitation with Lindsay, and the two have a great time doing what she enjoys. Then the man shows her a little of his work, and she is amazed by his talent. Afterwards, Miller decides to stop by for a beer, only to find Zwick coming out of the bar. Zwick mentions Beth's promotion. She'll be quite safe working alongside Perez and Jones. When Miller returns home, he finds April inside, and this time she has bruises on her body. She tells Miller that she really needs his help. The woman reveals that her boss runs a prostitution ring in the city, And every time she fails to meet her weekly quota, she's beaten. Now she fears for her life and must escape, but needs money to do so. After making Miller feel guilty about Kevin's death, he agrees to help her so that she can secure her way out. The job consists of stealing the pot from a private poker game that her boss's criminal partners will attend. If Miller does it, they'll split the money, and his debt to her will finally be settled. The next morning, Miller accompanies April to scope out her boss's house, where the poker game will take place. Miller needs to know the surroundings so he can find a way in. However, everything changes when he sees Zwick and his friends arrive at the house. They'll be the personal security for the event. For Miller, this adds a layer of revenge to the situation. Night falls, and at Garrett's house, April's boss, the party has begun, with dozens of girls attending to the guests while the poker game unfolds. Outside, we see Miller approaching stealthily, avoiding the guards and slipping in through a back door. Once inside, he goes through the hallways until he reaches the room where the money is supposedly hidden. There, he sees a large office, and on the table, a briefcase with the prize. The only problem is that Zwick enters the office right at that moment, so Miller jumps on him before he can draw his weapon. The protagonist fights the corrupt detective who, due to his age, loses the fight. Now Miller has Zwick's gun and points it at him. Even though he has a chance to avenge his friend, the gunshot noise would alert everyone. So Miller decides to flee with the money. Back in the office, Zwick finds a set of lockpicks on the floor, so now he knows for sure that Miller had something to do with the robbery. Returning to the protagonist, he has hidden the money in his business. But when he tries to contact April, she doesn't answer. The next morning, he goes to her house, but someone has broken the lock and the place is a mess. At home, Beth receives a visit from Tanya, a friend of April who is in the same situation. She's afraid Garrett might do something to her, so she's come to Beth to ask for her help. Tanya brings a USB drive with some photos. She also says that last night someone kidnapped April, and this morning she saw Miller leaving April's house. Hearing this, Beth checks the USB, where she finds photos of Zwick and the detectives using cocaine and abusing the women Garrett controls. Later, Beth confronts Miller and asks him to tell her the truth about what's going on, but he keeps his secret until he can figure out what to do with the evidence Tanya provided. Beth goes to Captain Stern to show him everything, asking him to stay calm since Perez is right outside trying to eavesdrop. Across town, Miller returns to Garrett's house to try to make a deal. Miller will give Garrett his money back in exchange for freeing April. Garrett listens carefully to Miller's proposal, but it's only a ruse for Miller to get close and attack him. After a few hits, Garrett loses the fight and is now being tortured by Miller, who demands to know where April is being held. After some torture, Garrett reveals that Zwick has her and that she's probably already dead if she hasn't said anything useful. As the protagonist leaves the house, we see Zwick's car watching from a distance, and inside it is April, revealing that they only manipulated Miller to get the money. Next, Zwick enters the house and takes advantage of Garrett's weakened state to murder him. It turns out the real plan wasn't just about the money. Zwick wants to take over the entire prostitution ring for himself. At the police station, Perez has broken into the captain's office to check the folder Beth gave him. He discovers the evidence, so he knows that soon they'll all end up in prison for corruption. Now that Beth knows the truth about her colleagues, she goes to Miller, who tells her what really happened that night 10 years ago, in addition to everything that's going on now. After the confession, he gives the money to Beth, and she goes to meet Captain Stern. Elsewhere in the city, Jones calls Zwick to inform him that the captain already knows everything about their dirty dealings, and that they'll soon end up in prison. After that, Perez and Jones get the order to kill Miller and recover the money. However, they only manage to wound him in the leg for the time being. Miller tries to hide while Jones keeps firing at anything that moves. Luckily, Frank has a shotgun and takes care of Jones. However, Perez comes in through the back door and kills Frank. He also has Lindsay locked in his car. Beth, who was taking the money and the rest of the evidence to the captain's house, hears the alert about the shooting and recognizes Frank's address. She rushes back, knowing that the protagonist is out of luck. Miller has no money, but Perez takes Lindsay as leverage, and if Miller wants to see her again, he'd better get the money back and wait for his call. Meanwhile, Frank, who was only trying to help his friend get back on track, is now dead because of him. Beth also blames Miller for everything that's happening. Her little girl has been kidnapped, and they'll most likely end up dead because of what they know. A minute later, they receive a call from Zwick, giving them the address for the exchange. Meanwhile, April finally sees her niece, though not in the way she'd like. Lindsay is crying while Perez handcuffs her to a table. April regrets helping Zwick and sends Miller the location where Lindsay is being held. Armed with this information, Beth goes on foot to rescue her, while Miller meets with Zwick to make the exchange. Back with Lindsay, the young girl takes advantage of Perez's momentary absence to use the skills her father taught her to pick the handcuffs. Beth approaches Lindsay's position step by step. In an instant, Lindsay breaks free and runs out at just the right time for Beth to seize the opportunity and get a clean shot at Perez. Afterward, Beth steals Perez's car and rushes to Miller, who is about to be executed by Zwick. Just as Zwick is about to pull the trigger, a bullet pierces his back. It's revealed that April is the one who fired the shot at his eye because he refused to give her a share of the money. April tells Miller that she intended to kill him anyway, since she overheard Zwick bragging to his friends about murdering Kevin to get promoted to lieutenant. After killing Zwick, April aims her gun at Miller and demands the money. She plans to kill him too, because if it weren't for him, Kevin wouldn't have been murdered in the first place. Beth shows up just in time to calm the situation, and April finally lowers her gun, giving herself up. Now that all the bad guys are dead, Miller has a new chance to make things right, and Beth has the position she always wanted, as the city's new lieutenant.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.